metastasized everywhere.
So just to give you an example of what they finally found when they started looking under the hood, I had a grapefruit-sized tumor on my right ovary that was pressing against my right ureter, which was shutting down my kidney function. That was number one.
Hello, and welcome to the Energy Flow podcast. I'm Kelly Kennedy, and I am here to discuss all things energy, fascia, lymphatics, oxygen, and water. Over my 26 years of being on this journey and 19 years in clinical practice, dealing with chronically ill, chronically pained, to the optimizing of health and to everything in between, we have learned throughout these years how to efficiently and effectively teach people how the body works, get them engaged in that system, help them understand how the universe works and how those two connect. And that's what this Energy Flow podcast is about. Whether you are new to us or you've been a longtime listener of over 4 years now, we are so happy and honored to share our heart's honest truth about what we know, what has worked for us, what's worked in the clinical practice, and what might be the key to your next step in your journey. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing this with all that it will resonate with. We look forward to each and every moment of our genuine connection. Thank you for listening. I wanted to intro her first because Dr. Nasha Winters is one of the greatest pioneers in this industry, truly leading the charge, not only from a clinical perspective, but from a policy perspective, from an education perspective, and from making it happen. And so today I want to give you a little window into this dear woman that I've gotten to know over the last 5 years. I've known of her, however, for a lot longer. Because if you know trained medicine, you know biological medicine, then you know Dr. Nasha Winters and what she's been doing and the stake she's been holding for us. And we're so happy, so many of us, that you're taking it on, that you want to start the hospitals and do what you do. And so I would just love for you, if you would, Nasha, just Dr. Nasha. I mean her no disrespect. I truly love this woman and know her. So for those just discovering you, could you tell them a little bit more like about your mission and what some of the biggest things are about what you've seen from what happened to you in the conventional world?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Kelly. This has been a long time coming. And please, Nasha is absolutely fine. It's super weird. I mean, I know who I am. I know what my education is. I don't need that title to remind me of that on a daily basis. I appreciate the respect you offering in that. But just so you and your listeners know, it's like, I'm Nasha, right? So there you go. But the other side is just I want to give a little shout out to you and the relationship you and I built over these years. The very first time I met you, it was just like, I don't know, like a moth to a flame, like just like undeniable. You could not look away if you wanted to. A very sweet, 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 powerful connection. And it's just continued to grow over these years. And it's just a delight to sort of, I feel like we're playing like I don't know, like pickleball or something together, like volleying it back over the net as we both are moving, hopefully, the conversation, the narrative forward that we can experience health and healing in a different way than it's currently being offered. So I love being on this journey with you, and it's an honor to be with your listeners. So that's my little shout out to the love fest of you. And then just a little bit of background on me, golly, and spring of 1991, I was dealing with some health issues that just kept escalating and escalating, and I'd be into the ER every couple of weeks, at least once a month for months on end. And it was just, they thought, as did I, that it was just worsening of my previous collection of symptoms and diagnoses, things like irritable bowel syndrome, polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile onset rheumatoid arthritis. Those were the patterns, cystic acne, anxiety, depression, extreme constipation. Now, I'm 19 years old, mind you, in this year of
I was going to
1991.
say, you were
Right?
19, weren't even 20 when this was going on.
Nope. And it was just so the other piece is every time I'd land in that ER, they just write me another script for another anxiolytic or another pain med. And then they started to label me as a histrionic drug seeking woman. So I got put into a container that they stopped listening, and so I want to give like I'm understanding, where they were coming from at that point as a clinician. We sometimes jump to our assumptions, and we have to really check ourselves as clinicians about that. So it's a shout out to anybody else who's practiced and maybe made a quick judgment that maybe that person really was trying to tell you something was different, something was off, something wasn't right, and perhaps it was an opportunity to lean in and listen more with them, because even just being an avid holder of that space and a listener can really change someone's outcome, can be the medicine itself. And so here we are, 1991, histrionic teenage drug seeker, showing up in the emergency room constantly, about 2 weeks before my 20th birthday. So my birthday is September 30th. And so about 2 weeks, so it's about mid-September. I'm now in my sophomore year of college. And my roommate, Chad, comes home we both worked at we both were in school, but also worked in a nursing home, and we had swing shifts. So my shift was typically 11 to 7 a.m. So I worked graves, and he was typically 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And he came home and found me unconscious and got me in, got an ambulance and went with me to the emergency room again. And this time I had a different doctor who did a little bit more exploring and realized something really was wrong, was beyond all the things. So fast forward, it took about 6 weeks to get the full diagnosis because of just the nature of being in a small town in 1991. The technologies weren't there that they are today. But it was October 21st of 1991 that I was diagnosed with end-stage ovarian cancer, metastasized everywhere. Yeah. And what I was
Everywhere.
dealing
Sorry,
with
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Metastasized everywhere.
everywhere. So just to give you an example of what they finally found when they started looking under the hood, I had a grapefruit-sized tumor on my right ovary that was pressing against my right ureter, which was shutting down my kidney function. That was number one. Number two, I had a liver full of lesions. So the liver function was suboptimal. I had biliary obstruction. So things were pushing against the biliary tract. So kind of the tubes leaving my liver moving into my colon were squished as well. I had fluid filling my entire abdomen. That's known as ascites. That can be either inflammatory or malignant fluid buildup, and mine was malignant. So it was this bloody buildup, and you could see it when they started to drain it, that's what it was. And then it was later biopsied to show that. And then the biggest thing, and why I kept showing up in the emergency room for months on end, was my constipation was worsening, and I was having more and more pain in my abdomen, in my pelvis. So they kept thinking it was like endometriosis or my IBS. And what it ended up being, of course, this grapefruit-sized tumor was causing some obstruction, but I also had a complete bowel obstruction. And so each time I would eat or drink anything, I would throw up. It would cause excruciating pain, and it just was a terrifying time, as you can imagine. So fast forward, the doctor coming in bawling because he had a daughter my age, and he did not want to have to tell me that news. He also didn't want to tell me that there was nothing that could be done, because to be an end-stage organ failure, as sick and as cachectic, so very muscle wasted that I was, everyone else thought I also had an eating disorder. So I had like all these assumptions of my age range, right? Was that I was in end-stage cancer. And what I know now as a clinician is they told me I had 3 months to live. I didn't have 3 weeks to live at the state that I was in. And to be really transparent with your listeners, up until that moment, I didn't have a desire to live. I did actually tried to take my life on two different occasions in high school, in junior high, and again in high school.
Because symptoms that you were dealing with that were unable to be figured out, or because of some other reason?
So many reasons. I mean, well, we can unpack that a little bit further as well, because a lot of people say, well, why do you think you got cancer at such a young age? Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons. It's never one thing, but some of that complicating factor was coming from extreme trauma, and also coming from an environment where there was no hope to have a different or better life. And so the sort of lack of belief that something could be better was not instilled in me. And yet, so that moment that diagnosis came, there was a glimpse of relief. because it looked like for me, there was like a flash in my mind that was cancer is a way sexier way to go than, swallowing a bottle of pills. That was just the mindset that I was in that moment when I had that news. But then something else happened after they figured out what was going on and then told me the prognosis and then gave me the expiration date. That did something really interesting to my psychology and to my nervous system. It was like it lit a pilot light.
Hmm.
And it was basically telling you if it can't be done, it put sort of like I've said this before, but I feel like it turned on my double dog dare gene. And just this moment of, well, if you're telling me I can't, but I'm gonna show you. Like that stream of stubbornness was very much alive and well in me. My mom, everyone in my life would tell you that. It got provoked in a pretty big way to be told that there was nothing that could be done. It was a moment to realize, given no option, the only option for me was didn't expect to fight it or survive it. I just wanted to understand it. And so, Kelly, that's what's led to that now nearly a 34-year journey, given 3 months to live, and not having anybody there to say that anything could be different than that. I had to
Yeah.
go completely internally to find those resources to somehow accidentally, to be honest, change that trajectory.
I say cancer is often the answer, and I've heard you say things like cancer is your messenger. And now we know what you mean by that. Cancer was your messenger to wake you up.
Big time. Big time. And it sounds so cliche, but I am so grateful for it every day. I literally have BC and AC, before cancer and after cancer, is the story of my life. It just is. And it's funny. Another piece here is I never shared. There were maybe 5 people in my whole life, and that included healthcare providers, a professor, and close friends that knew of my diagnosis and knew what I was facing until about 2012. I was very private about this. And I continue to be somewhat, and we can go into that if you wanted another time, but for me, it was incredibly imperative to keep this in the vault. There was so much abuse and trauma around my diagnosis that there was also a lot of shame. It took me years to unpack that, to recognize that the abuse, the types of things I experienced were not something that I did wrong. It took me a long time to appropriate where the harm was being done, and that I did not bring that on myself. So there was a lot of energy around that to change up. But the piece is that I walked this path very, very much alone. And the only reason it started to come out to play is as I was sort of winding up my private practice and started having a practice entirely focused on oncology. There were a few people close to me that said, it's time to tell your story. And in that, a couple patients really brought that forward for me, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for them. Some of them are still here, some of them aren't. All of them far exceeded their expiration date, and all of them touched me and taught me in a way that showed there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of any type of chronic illness, trauma, cancer, anything along the way. There is a biography that leads to our biology. And I have worked really hard to understand that for myself and help thousands, if not tens of thousands of other patients do the same.
Yeah, because now you took that not only into clinical practice, but now you're teaching practitioners. And as I said, changing policy and, just I had no idea, honestly, Nasha, that you had held that for so long. So in 2012, that was only 13 years ago. That's, I guess, when I started to see you on the scene, so to speak.
Yeah.
Did you write that first mistletoe book?
Well, the first book was The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, which I completed right before Thanksgiving of 2016 to hand it over to the publisher, and it was birthed into the world in May of 2017. We're actually just talked to our publisher. We're going to do a revised and expanded edition coming out at its 10-year anniversary in early 2027, which I'm very excited about. But that was what I mean, I was already kind of on a global stage at that point. We had patients coming in from all over the world to my little podunk town of Durango, Colorado, because of a story I shared in a ovarian cancer symposium in the state of Colorado put me on the map. And that wasn't the intention. It was a side effect of that process. And because, just so your listeners know, at least in 2012, there were 27,000 women diagnosed every year with ovarian cancer, and over 17,000 of them died every year. So what that meant was standard of care offered little, if any, hope to these women. And so they created their own support groups,
Right.
their own environments, and they became scrappy and resilient. Sound familiar? And started to figure shit out on their own. And because of a few of those women in that group that were my patients, both like two of the main women are still very much alive and well that were had stage 4 end stage ovarian cancer, still very alive and well all these years later, got me at a symposium in Denver, Colorado, a Colorado Alliance in Ovarian Cancer. A funny story, just a quick one. There were several oncologists that were supposed to speak at that event, but because they had a naturopath speaking, they boycotted the event.
Because you were speaking.
Uh-huh. They thought I was completely like I was dismantling the credibility. This is the bullshit of what I dealt with and still deal with today. But it was even worse back in 2012. And the crazy thing is they had me not just present once, they had me present 3 times because there were breakout sessions and nobody wanted to go to the other breakout sessions. They all wanted to come to mine. So they had me do it multiple times so that people would go to the other speakers. And their website crashed, so I got a clear glimpse in 2012. It makes me so emotional thinking about it, that the only way it was going to change is the patients were going to change it. And a different experience was going to change it. The doctors weren't changing it. I wasn't changing it as a doctor, right? But to understand that these women were changing it and changing the policy and demanding something different, it inspired me and it literally pulled me out of my closet to start to share my own story because I realized that silencing my story was actually causing harm versus help. I had a belief that it would either A, cause harm, B, not be believed, which I've lived that for all my life as well, for many reasons, all in different places, or that it would actually create anger, which I've also experienced right up front. And questioning of how things are being done, push against the narrative. So it's been an interesting journey. It's been an interesting journey for sure.
I am calling it the labyrinth as of late because,
Mhm.
it's that song by Belinda Carlisle, The Story, I was reminded of this last summer. And as I listened to it, it was like, the only reason we have a story is so we can get through our story, our biography, as you say, so we can then create our own story and really manifest our own story, not be a victim or a martyr to our biography and our terrain, and to change our terrain, right? And to create a different story. And you have just obviously exemplified that by overcoming end stage cancer at 19 years old in the 90s when did you want to be a naturopath before that?
Wanted to be a conventional medical doctor. I was well on my way. I was pre-med, was well on my way to that. I was a biology chemistry major. This illness took me out of the rest of my fall semester of 1991. Took a break to kind of get stabilize some things. But I got right back in. I just was like, I'm going to get through this. I'm the only person in my family to go to college. So there were so many things I was overcoming within myself, within the culture, within my mindset. I mean, there's so much to this, right? And so when I came back, I changed my major to psychology biology and basically did a self-constructed major of psychoneuroimmunology. And that's where it took me down a very different path. And you spoke very much about the terrain. I realized part of my initial healing, because people say, what did you do first? Well, first I fasted because I couldn't eat. And so I was not fasting to think this is going to cure my cancer. I was fasting because I couldn't eat.
Autophagy because I'm going to fast. No, you
No,
didn't know what you were doing.
exactly. This is before Dr. Walter Longo was on stages or what. Like, we did not know this stuff back then, right? In 1991.
Listen to your instinct of your body said, don't put anything inside me because I
Yeah,
can't do it.
it couldn't do. And there was, even if I did, if I went against it, I would let me know very quickly. So your listeners people always get shocked when they hear this, but I did not eat for 2.5 months.
Wow.
And that resolved the bowel obstruction, and that resolved most of the ascites. I had to still get the ascites drained quite a bit in those first few weeks on, and it kind of lingered into the first few months, but my body dealt with it. And it stabilized so many things. And I was so weirdly cachectic, but strange things happened. My body composition normalized in fasting, which this is a weird paradox that we can talk about some other time in the physiology of what's going on there. But that muscle wasting process is not a caloric issue. It's an inflammatory issue and an insulin issue. And because I wasn't eating, I wasn't having insulin spikes anymore. And I'd been a total carb junkie prior to my diagnosis. And the inflammatory process that I dealt with my entire life was just one giant inflamed ball, was now that fire was being put out in the fasting process. So that was an accidental side effect. And then the other big event for me was I did a 2-year family fast. I changed the environment, the terrain of the people closest to me around me. I became very, very protective of my space, my energy, and my story. And no one was allowed to penetrate that boundary. I'd had no boundaries in my life growing up, and that was where the trauma and drama began for me. And this was an opportunity. I set incredibly fierce, fierce boundaries.
Your amazing will and persistence of your heart is exceptional, Nasha. And the more I hear of your story, the more I know of you. It just expands me and expands my heart a little bit more to just know how fascinating our drive is, how that will to live, that will to thrive, that will that's innate, what we call the source love, that you let it drive. You just kicked out the mind and you're like, fuck all y'all. I am forward pacing with my heart. And here we go. I'm in the driver's seat now, and literally told everybody to back off. And I applaud you for the courage, meaning heart, that took for your heart, really. I mean, you saw your heart before everybody else did. And because of that, you were able to have this quantum leap of healing. And you allowed yourself to take away all the other inputs so your body could focus on what was going on at the heart of the matter, which I'm sure through that fasting, there's not a spiritual culture that doesn't use fasting for a reason to overcome something, as you and I both know. While there is metabolic
Yeah.
abilities to life and so forth that we're going to talk about in just a moment, it was that spiritual, I'm sure, as are you, shift that fasting created that allowed for that spontaneous healing, allows you to start to regulate and regenerate and really heal.
That's a really great way. And of course, I did not go into that knowing that's what I
Of
was doing.
course not. You just trusted all the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then figured it out, and then became a doctor and went into clinical practice and helped thousands of others. And then thank God for the 2 patients that were like, hey, you're not doing your job. You're not doing your mission, lady.
Yeah.
Hey, lady. So talk about the metabolic platform, if you will, because that was your first book, and really looking at, and obviously now I understand why, because you really reset your metabolism. You're like, no, 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 you're going in the wrong direction. Let's scoot you around here. Could you speak to that a little bit, and how your metabolic model for approaching cancer, just give us a quick summary of it.
Sure. Well, first, folks need to know the predominant paradigm of oncology is one of a gene theory or a somatic mutation theory. That's still driving the train. Dr. Bovary in 1917 coined that terminology, and that's how we've been going ever since. We've been looking for a single target, a single broken gene with a single treatment to treat it, and it's not done us many favors, right? We've really not changed progression-free survival or overall survival one iota since we claimed the war on cancer in 1971. So there's that piece. And so what emerged shortly after Dr. Bovary's ideology was another character, Dr. Otto Warburg in the 1920s, who said, wait a minute, the genes are involved, but they're the downstream effect. They're an effect of, not a cause of the problem. We need to look more upstream. And this upstream is in that metabolic. So when we think metabolic, most of us think about calories, metabolic. My metabolic system is fast or slow, so I'm either fat or thin. It's so much more than that. Really, when we say metabolic, we mean mitochondrial. Okay. And so this is the emerging theory that happened shortly after Bovary's theory. And this is where we were studying and understanding and celebrating this. In fact, winning Nobel Prizes around this concept up until Watson and Crick found the DNA of our genes in the 1950s. So for a good 30 years, this metabolic mitochondrial theory prevailed and overtook the somatic mutation theory. But Watson and Crick took us back onto the path of the gene, and we've been there ever since, despite the fact that all the studies have elicited very lackluster outcomes, and that we really do understand that the nuclei in our cells, which holds all of our DNA, our genetic material, if you replace those nuclei with healthy or cancerous, you should theoretically turn those cells into cancer or healthy cells, and that never happens. So that's what people keep scratching their head saying, why are we still beating to the rhythm of this drum when it's not putting out what we thought it would? So what has really prevailed and what is taking over, in fact, a paper just came out last week showing that finally, at its rightful place, the metabolic mitochondrial theory of cancer is the current dominant theory of cancer, and that we should be putting our energies there. And so simply put, when I think about the mitochondria and metabolic, I think of three processes that are happening. So the first is think about it as just being these receivers of information. So the mitochondria, yeah, they're just like, they're taking it all in, folks. They're taking in water, light, sound, food. They're taking in soil. They're taking in energy. They're taking in emotions. They're taking in frequencies. They're taking in everything. So they're a receiver of information, everything we put in, on, and around us. And just simply put, think about how much has changed since the 1850s to after World War II to after 1980. So much has changed. We have a lot more input than we've ever had in human existence. So those little mitochondria are taking in a lot, are a little overwhelmed. Second job they have is translation. So they translate all that input. They make sense of it. They categorize it. They organize it. Third is they then send signals out to the cell, the organelles of the cells, the tissues, the organs, the structure, the field outside of the body, and to all those that come in contact with their field and them directly, send out signals, messages, things like hormones, things like behaviors, things like thoughts into the world around them. So take in information, translate it, communicate it, signal it, right? That is metabolic health.
They're like the
Exactly. And so through that filter, just so your listeners are clear, today we're able to show that less than 7% of Americans, and likely anybody from developed nations, are considered metabolically, mitochondrially healthy. And the very problem is that we're having too much input, we're jamming up the translation, and we're doing poor communication. And until we correct that, we'll continue to make it worse. So for instance, cancer, our typical approach to cancer is to poison ourselves back to health. Input of information that actually was born out of a wartime. So the chemotherapies came out of biological warfare that we apply to those cells to then have to translate it and then have to put out new signaling information. So somehow we miraculously still survive. Many of us have gone through chemo and are still here to tell the story. That by and of itself is a miracle. Not that they survived the cancer, but that they survived the treatment, because that was more input that jams up the translation even more and jams up the communication even further. However, when we approach it and we support the input, we support the translation, and we support the signaling or the communication, we can tolerate many things better and hopefully not need those things. And so, simply put, our mitochondria are at the core, and they're just these little bacteria that we evolved from over 170,000 years ago that have a continuous sort of lineage of the sort of original mother, the kind of the original incubator of these bacteria, and where they were carried through many, many millennia to where we are today. They've never experienced as much input as they have in these last 200 years. and especially in the last 50 years. So we're overwhelming them. And our job as terrain experts, as bioregulatory experts, is to help make sense of that information and help the body translate it and communicate it more effectively and efficiently to our cells, but also to ourselves.
Well, I feel like a lot of people are going to want to read your book when it has the rewrite, or perhaps now and then rewrite or reread it during the rewrite, because this is the foundation of what I learned years ago in regards to cancer, right? It's that terrain. When you change that environment, the signaling changes, and then the cell uptake changes, then the function of the organs can change. And this kill theory and this war on cancer and using drugs that were developed during war times, it just for me is an approach that's um, has been played out. And like you say, we haven't gotten the greatest effect, although I'm sure we would both agree sometimes you need chemo and radiation,
Oh,
perhaps
absolutely.
immunotherapy or targeted therapies with the upregulatory approach as well, as I know you teach, because that's how you get the best outcomes, right?
Exactly.
It's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but at the same time, from my approach, like, can we prevent it and not need it? And make a quantum leap by jumping into that spirit and allowing that to shift and pleomorphically change in a quantum second and not work on this time level of the 3D only and working at the 5D to make those shifts. But in the meantime, if you need those types of supports, then there are practitioners out there that will support you through that type of diagnosis. Or if you're feeling stuck and you're like, wow, I don't want to get cancer, and I know this isn't about my genes, I know this is about my terrain, and I know this is about my environment, then this is the approach that you want to do a little bit more investigation of. And please know that today is not the end of this talk for you.
Just the beginning, folks.
Just the beginning. Um, how do you integrate the data-driven results with your intuitive healing protocols? Because I know you and I know how intuitive you are, and I know how heart-centered you are, as we just said. And then I know you became this doctor that also learned protocols and learns and loves statistics and loves, you look at her so happy. Yes, I do. Yes, I do love
Yeah.
statistics. Because for that, you're looking for significance. You're looking for, is this theory that we created biologically and we saw it happen once, can we apply it to 13 people, apply that science 1,300 people, and now get the same outcomes? Then that is significant statistically, and now we can create protocols out of it. That's how real science works.
Right. Well, first, I've never had anybody ask me that question. So really beautiful. And it's a funny thing because, I mean, medicine, we call it the practice of medicine or the art of medicine. And yet today, unfortunately, most clinicians do not have the privilege or the opportunity to practice or develop the art of it.
Mm.
The system is broken, not the doctors, because the doctors came. I mean, it's really rare that someone says, I'm going to go into medicine just to get money. Because, first of all, you don't make money anymore as a clinician. You just don't. It's the system is so set up against folks, like the cost to go to school and go through that education and the sacrifices you make to get that education is frankly not financially worth it for most people unless you become like the top anesthesiologist or something. Like it's not the system for that. So instead, these doctors who came at it saying, I want to do better for humanity, I want to help people, they have their own pain to purpose story, they get into a system that they become locked in. It becomes a prison. And so they are unable to really take the time to be with the patient, to feel into their own intuition into the situation. When you're given an average of 7 minutes in some studies, up to 15 minutes in other studies of time with a patient, it is very difficult to hone in to that important medical skill set of just presence and instinct that are just as critical as the blood test, the biopsy results, or the imaging, right? And so they need to come together.
That's beautiful. Thank you. They're just as important,
Yeah. Yeah.
just as important.
And we've had to scooch that other component away to make room for a broken system. and it doesn't serve anybody at the end of the day. Burnout rates among doctors is at an all-time high. Matriculation into new and medical schools is at an all-time low, and patient chronic illness and mortality is at an all-time high.
It's a really, and thank God for people like you creating hospitals with this approach. And I know that's probably a jump, a quantum jump, but from a time perspective. And we're going to go into a part two for those of you who are supportive of the work we do at Energy Flow through the forum. And you do a part two, we're going to dive in and we're going to do some rapid fire questioning. We're going to talk about how she's lived her life for 34 years and some of the things that she does and some things she can, because a lot of you listeners have had cancer. And yeah, I know this woman, she doesn't live in fear. One of the, I mean, she doesn't live, she lives, she full out lives. And she lives every day as though whether she's going to be here tomorrow or not, she's going to enjoy today. So, I mean, I want to ask you about frequency and how you apply that to clinical practice. Like, there's so many things we could talk about. Obviously, as you know, we could talk all day, but just give them an idea of your, not only your vision. Now it's not a vision anymore. I remember when we met 5 years ago, it was not, it was truly a vision. And now you're putting this into action. But what you're doing for the face of medicine to really bring the art and the intuitive practitioner that is able to train with you and learn how to bring this lab work and these two things together and marry them. And what does that look like for you now in the clinical world?
Sure. Well, two simple things. Like the big naysayers would always say, hey, there's no research in what we do, and there's you're just charlatans trying to take people's money. Those are the two things that I've had said to people in my industry forever. And then I just sit there and think, and how much kickbacks do you get from the pharmaceutical company? And, like we're the only country outside of, I think, Australia or New Zealand that advertises pharmaceuticals on TV and whatnot. And somehow we're the ones without integrity. Just so weird to me. But anywho, one arm of this is research. We actually opened a lab a year ago. We're doing a big open house actually tomorrow night in Phoenix, Arizona, of a non, it's basically, think of it as an incubator for innovation, and an environment that is not beholden to any industry, that's asking the good questions that need to be asked and doing the research that no one wants to fund or research. So when people say there's no research, well, part of that's because there's no one wanting to do it, and there's no funding in it, and there's no money to be made at the end of the day of things like lifestyle and dietary interventions or supplements or combinations of off-label drugs. The financials don't make sense unless it's $1 billion blockbuster pharmaceutical. No one's interested in investing in the research. So instead of that, we're moving into kind of a new realm in research of citizen science, moving into a new realm of philanthropically funded research projects, moving into a place of asking questions and doing the research that no one wants to do. So that's happening on one level. The other level is training an entire new generation of clinicians. And to date, on this conversation, we are over 850 clinicians and allied health professionals strong in 46 countries. To make a dent, we need 20,000 clinicians. We need about 40,000 allied health professionals, and we need about 60,000 patient advocates to make a dent in what we want to do. And we will do that. That is absolutely where we're going. These people are flocking to us to get this education because we get 30,000 hits on average a month on our data, on our directory of people looking for folks trained in this approach to apply this approach to their own wellness journey, whether it's cancer or something else. And then the third piece here is the data. You mentioned I'm a data junkie. I love it, but it's also daunting and it's time consuming. Things that doctors don't have the time to learn or to have the time to evaluate. So we have developed a data platform which has been used, it's been betaed in our community for a while, and it's getting ready to go live beyond our community. But this is taking all those millions of metrics that I'm interested in looking at. So think about this. It's like we've created a database mitochondria, taking in all the information, everything from like people's zip code,
All the input.
all the input, our
From all your trained practitioners, your 850 clinicians that are out there doing this work, and they're using this platform, collecting the data so you can put it in, you can look for the.
And it goes, so we're taking in like a 54-page intake process. It's amazing. Like it's taken in like your ACE score, your environmental medicine toxicities, like what were your zip codes at your major, like where you were conceived at the first 2 years of life, the first 7 years of life, the first third, to know what your exposures were, to know about the mental state of your parents at the time of your conception. Like we take in data as theoretically insignificant for some of that, all the way to the data points of imaging, of blood or tissue biopsies, of single nucleotide polymorphisms, the people's epigenetics SNPs, of their labs, of functional medicine testing, even of air quality testing, soil testing, water testing in their own environment. We take in millions and millions of metrics on each and every patient. That then gets the second part translated. That gets evaluated for patterns, significant patterns. And then third is, what do you do about it? What do you do with all that information? So address, that's where you signal it or communicate it out. That's where you create this tool becomes a clinical decision-making tool. It helps evaluate that volume of data to then say, based on this data, these are the approaches that seem to fit best for these type of patterns. Okay. What this does is what takes an average of 7 to 8 hours for me to prepare to evaluate a patient's data is now done in real time, automated, thank you to AI that's been
Wow.
learning and continuing to learn. It's iterative. So not just my brain, which is the foundation of it, but the brains of hundreds of other practitioners and patients' data points, thousands of patient data points coming in. And it's iterative. It will continue to get smarter over time. But what this does is what we talked about just a moment ago. It frees up the time that that doctor does not have to evaluate that data, make sense of that data, and then decide what they're going to do with that data. Instead, they get to go back to why they went into medicine to begin with, to be present with that patient. Now it all comes together. Now you bring back the art and the practice of medicine and the humanity of medicine and the connection. Because I will tell you, and the data shows, we've actually come through a big clinical trial on this, that patients, the number one, so 70% of all patients dealing with a cancer diagnosis complain that they never feel seen or heard. That is a common thread in patients with cancer. And there's some big studies around this. So imagine if people can be seen and heard because the data has been figured out ahead of time. Now they just get to be present. We don't have that. That is a lost art in medicine. And so what we're developing and what we get to do, and the future is here now, is to give the tools for the clinician to actually get back to what really matters, and that's to be present with the patient.
That is beautiful how we take the 3D and the 5D and really braid them together, which is something that we've been talking about on this podcast for a long time and applying at the clinic is that it's, yes, we're 5D beings, but we're living in a 3D world. So we've got to apply to that rule set essentially. And so by being able to look at all the lifestyle, all the comprehensive approach that terrain medicine has and the beauty of what AI has done. I'm so excited about AI, to be honest with you. It's like,
It's for good. It can be used for bad, but it can be used for good
absolutely,
when you're
but how
putting the tools together. Yeah.
when it really can duplicate Nasha's brain because I I try not to. I really do. I try not to text her very often and ask her those questions. But every once in a while, I'm just like, I just need to get to her brain and ask her this one question. And I'll text her, and God bless her soul, she'll answer. And it's people like her that I'm like, how can you possibly teach somebody everything you know with 34 years of experience, not only your own personal, but all the clinical experience, and with how fast disease is advancing now because of the excess input, particularly not just since the Industrial Revolution, but since COVID.
Right. A big change in the last 4 or 5 years.
Big,
Yeah.
with a major amount of fear and stress. So as we shift to this next one, I just want to first of all give you so much gratitude. And for anybody who is wanting to facilitate or help Nasha, would you please let them know how they can reach out to you, how they can support you, how they can find practitioners perhaps that are trained by you, because you don't work with anybody one-on-one anymore, just so everybody knows, because she knows she can affect more lives by training thousands of people that do this across the world and give access to her and all these great things she's creating. So we just applaud you for leveling up like that because we know that's not easy when you're a doctor, and we know that you love to put your hands on people and apply that artwork, but you're bravo doing it even better. So
Mhm.
how can they find you?
Sure. Well, start out with reading, Metabolic Approach to Cancer if you're new to it. It's on Audible as well. It's on Kindle, so there's lots of different ways to metabolize it, if you will. Then the second book, Mistletoe and the Future, the Emerging Future of Integrative Oncology, goes into a deeper, more focused mistletoe itself is a really profound tool in oncology, but also what's on the horizon for more in this arena of true integration of the best of standard of care with the best of alternative or integrative care. But you can also find information on mtih.org, which stands for Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health.org. That's the nonprofit arm that I founded, that I'm no longer the executive director of, but it is the part that's doing our research and our patient grants, making sure that we are studying this information and making it accessible. So that's the one piece. And then drnasha.com has access to every podcast I've ever done, my own podcast, Metabolic Matters. One of these days, Kelly will be having a conversation with me there as well. Also, all the different things we're doing in the metabolomics space, so the database platform space, the future hospital space, the trainings, the education space. There's a lot of places to learn about all that we're up to and get involved as a volunteer, as a student, as a donor, as an investor. There are a lot of opportunities to help leave a legacy of a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
And that's what I would anybody ask, to send a little thank you to Nasha for what she's doing for the future, which is, as she says, now, to assure that we have a bright future and access to true healing, ancient arts, but applied in modern medicine and with modern ways, and arming really housing a huge army of change makers for the next stage of medicine. And so thank you for what you do, and thank you all that have followed this work, and please consider supporting Nasha and all the different ways that you can, and dive in a little deeper. And for those of you sticking around, stick around, because here we go. Well, champions of the vibe flow community, energy flowing through that body, thank you for sharing this time with us and getting through the entire episode today. I know time is what we're spending here as our currency on this planet as people, and it really does mean a lot that as we devote our time and energy into creating this content, that you stuck with us throughout it. So if you would like more on this particular subject from this expert and get that free gift, make sure to register for our Energy Flow Forum. And you too, with a very nominal price, can access all sorts of upgraded content and deeper dives into the very subjects that you love: energy, fascia, lymphatics, oxygen, and water. As you know, as always, on this show and any content that we create, it is for your own health purposes. This is not intended to be advice or medical diagnoses or professional advice. It's purely information that if it resonates with you and you apply it and you upgrade, we love to hear about it. What a great coincidence, and we're happy to be on that journey with you. If this doesn't resonate with you, and you know somebody it will, pass it along. And in the meantime, know that we truly are here to show you and explain to you and be with you through this lovely journey of life, and to share our experiences together and help each other upgrade, because that's how we're going to do this, together, collaborating with love at the center. I'm Kelly Kennedy, and I am so grateful from my heart to yours to share this time, energy, and space with you.